It's open season on foreign students studying in America, depending on their beliefs. Criticizing Israel and its war on Gaza can get you deported. Not to be outdone, the German authorities are doing the same, pushing to deport students who oppose the genocide. And Serbia, where for all the protesters on the streets, the Vučić government still has the bulk of the mainstream media in its corner. Tens of millions of Americans are asking themselves this question. How did Donald Trump's crackdown on undocumented immigrants, which he campaigned on, escalate into something far more troubling, a sweeping suppression of political dissent? Over the past month, more than 300 international students have lost their visas or been taken into custody, disappeared on their way to deportation. They made the mistake of exercising their constitutional right to protest over or simply oppose Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. The mainstream media have played a central role in this. News outlets that vilified pro-Palestinian activists, often calling them anti-Semitic. They're now in outrage mode, conveniently leaving out the part about laying down the groundwork for this repression in the first place. Right-wing pro-Zionist groups are doing their part, aiding in the clampdown, supplying the authorities with the names of students they want deported. This story has implications that go far beyond foreign students. It's about who can or cannot speak freely in America. And if history has taught us anything, this is just the beginning.
We're going to end up with the largest deportation in American history.
Having been elected after promising to crack down on undocumented immigrants, the Trump administration is now going after documented ones, students. Like Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia University graduate in New York with the requisite visa, who was arrested, jailed, disappeared, ticketed for deportation for organizing protests against Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. Rumeysa Ozturk, a doctoral student in Boston, grabbed off the street by masked men. Her crime, co-authoring an article in the school paper calling on her university to acknowledge the Palestinian genocide. Ranjani Srinivasan denies attending a protest at Columbia, saying she was just walking past it when she was arrested. Warned that her visa had been revoked, she fled to Canada. More than 300 foreign students have been targeted by an administration that constantly conflates political activism and criticism of Israel with threats to America's national security. Another thing that has been disappeared: due process.
The detention of Rumeysa Ozturk is particularly chilling because she was disappeared over an op-ed that she wrote in her student paper. It has had a really chilling effect on students and writers and activists that you can basically be disappeared off the street by masked individuals in plain clothes and unmarked cars simply for writing a critical article about the U.S. government.
There's blanket statements that are made that somehow the same rights and privileges of citizens to engage in activities in the United States, or even their First Amendment rights, are the same for foreign nationals. They are not. They simply are not.
We gave you a visa to come and study and get a degree, not to become a social activist that tears up our university campuses.
We do not have to let people into our country who are not citizens and promote activities supporting the enemies of the United States.
Well, the Bill of Rights doesn't use the word citizen. It talks about the rights of the people. The First Amendment says the rights of the people shall be protected. There are other parts of the Constitution where they refer to citizens. You can only be a president of the United States if you're a citizen, for instance. Think about the logical implications of the argument that suddenly 30 million people don't have any rights whatsoever under the Bill of Rights, don't have free speech rights. The right to due process would essentially be the establishment of a dictatorship in this country.
When the U.S. authorities hunt down candidates for deportation, they're getting some help from pro-Zionist Americans. For years now, organizations like Canary Mission and Beitar US have been scouring social media accounts, publishing the names of pro-Palestine voices, calling their activism anti-Semitism, doxing them, trying to ruin their reputations. 2 days after Mahmoud Khalil's arrest, Beitar US proudly tweeted, "We have been working on deportations. Expect naturalized citizens to start being picked up within the month." If the Trump administration was serious about cracking down on extremist rhetoric, it would focus on groups like Beitar US, which has said Israeli forces have not gone far enough in Gaza and has called for more blood there.
And now we're seeing the idea that maybe these organizations have some form of a role in the highest halls of power in the United States, which is troubling for an array of reasons, because there's no level of accountability, no understanding of who exactly is making the call to find these people to detain and subsequently to move to detain them. Some of them are just so loosely attacked for grounds that make no sense.
Previously, if you were a part of groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, that could land you on Canary Mission's website. And basically, they would dox you. They would put your photo, details about your life in order to try and hinder your job opportunities or just affect your life in this really negative way. And now we've seen these groups advocating for the deportation of students.
This is ultimately not about a free speech issue. This is about an activism issue. The question is how to define that activism and what led to a conclusion by the government that they were deportable. These are things that we feel are undermining the foreign policy and the security of our country.
Among the American institutions at the heart of this story and the way it's being told are U.S. universities and the mainstream news media. CNN offered its viewers something a little different this past week when one of its anchors, Jake Tapper, questioned the legal basis behind the student deportations.
So the question is, where's the evidence that they broke laws? Where's the evidence that they vandalized? Where's any of the evidence of any of this? All
salient points, except Tapper was one of many CNN voices that when the campus protests broke out last year, lumped the demonstrators in with Hamas supporters and anti-Semites, despite the fact that many of those protesters were Jewish.
Again, what you just saw is 2024 in Los Angeles, harkening back to the 1930s in Europe, and I do not say that lightly.
Now CNN's wondering how we got here. Universities have crumbled under threats from the Trump administration and the donors that many of them depend on. When the administration announced a review of Harvard's $9 billion in federal contracts and grants over allegations that the university had failed to address issues of anti-Semitism, Harvard quickly stripped faculty members of some of their responsibilities, those leading its Center for Middle Eastern Studies. And as unprecedented as all of this sounds, it's actually a case of American history repeating itself with a twist.
In the 1930s, Ivy League institutions like Yale and others not only refused to hire Jewish refugees fleeing Germany, but even refused to allow rabbis to speak about the horrors that were beginning to take place in Germany. So for these universities to claim that they are standing for anti-Semitism is just a pretext to suppress speech. All that they're trying to do is oppose and stop the expression of anti-war, anti-imperialist, and socialist views.
The story is being reported. What is not being reported is the role that these mainstream media organizations and corporations themselves played in paving the way for the attempted deportation of students like Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeysa Ozturk, and the demonization of chants like "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" has led to the demonization of pro-Palestine protesters.
They want to destroy the state of Israel, and they want to kill Jews and push them. See, they are Hamas on college campuses when they chant that.
There are still exercises in resistance taking place, like this one at the gates of Columbia University, which students, Jewish ones, chained themselves to over what is happening to their Muslim classmate, Mahmoud Khalil.
And we are here specifically as Jewish students because we are the only students who can be here right now taking this risk standing up.
Police quickly cordoned off the site, but as Jews and U.S. citizens, the protesters are not at risk of anything else. Unlike Mahmoud Khalil or the others, the ones who showed up at the wrong campus protest, shared the wrong post, or wrote the wrong op-ed, one critical of Israel.
Over the past year and a half, there have been mainstream media outlets who have compared student protesters who are standing against a genocide to Nazis. Seldom have those outlets compared the shadowy detention and attempted deportation of students for expressing their views against that genocide. They have not made that comparison to Nazism. That contradiction alone illustrates the broader reality of how we got here.
The government of the United States is deploying police to the streets and college campuses and sending them to detention centers over 1,000 miles away. That's the type of thing that happened under Pinochet in Chile, under Hitler and Mussolini in Germany and Italy. Every now and then, the New York Times and the Washington Post will have an op-ed wondering whether there is a constitutional crisis. This is a five-alarm fire. To those who ask what they would have done in 1933, what you do now is the answer to that question.
Staying with the draconian measures being used to police pro-Palestine speech, but in Germany. Since October 7th, 2023, the German authorities have banned protests, violently attacked and arrested activists, and further criminalized criticism of Israel. This past week, Berlin's immigration authorities took it all a step further, and Ryan Kohls is here with more.
In an unprecedented move, German authorities are pushing to deport 4 foreign students over their involvement in pro-Palestine activism. The students are accused of supporting Hamas and shouting anti-Semitic slogans, though no evidence has been provided, and of violating Germany's so-called Staatsräson, or reason of state, a cornerstone of German policy which sees Israel's security as intrinsically linked to Germany's national interest. The push to deport the student comes at a time when the German government is tightening its grip on political speech, with activists, journalists, and academics all facing increased scrutiny. Alexander Gorski, a lawyer representing 2 of the protesters, says authorities in Berlin are using the American playbook. You can see it in the US and Germany too. Political dissent is silenced by targeting the migration status of protesters. The German media have played a crucial role in shaping the narrative surrounding these deportations by demonizing pro-Palestine voices and justifying legal action against protesters.
Das sind nicht nur die nicht gebildeten und Verrückten, die auf die Straße gehen, sondern dieser Hass auf Juden und auf Israel, der geht bis in die hochgebildeten Schichten, Akademikerinnen und Akademiker in der Professorenschaft und so weiter.
And the German authorities are considering taking this even further. They're looking at new laws that would revoke the citizenship of dual nationals accused of being quote-unquote terrorist supporters or anti-Semites. The 4 students have a few weeks to leave Germany voluntarily or face getting forced out. Their legal teams are fighting the orders as the world watches to see if Germany, like the US, will continue to set dangerous new precedents for criminalizing criticism of Israel.
Thanks, Ryan. For the past 5 months, Serbia has been caught up in a persistent wave of protests. It started out with the collapse of a roof at a train station there that killed 16 people and has since evolved into a political movement that's pitted protesters against the government of President Aleksandar Vučić. Young Serbians have been on the front lines of these protests, demanding transparency, accountability, as well as political reform. But if you follow this story on media outlets that lean the Vučić government's way, you would see things differently. Taking their lead from government officials, a majority of mainstream media outlets have labeled the demonstrators as malicious, even dangerous. The narrative speaks of armed protesters backed by the opposition and foreign powers threatening the stability of the country. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now from Belgrade on Alexander Vucic's loyalists in the media and the pushback those news outlets are getting from the citizens of Serbia.
It is 7:30 p.m. in Serbia. The state TV channel RTS's main evening news bulletin begins, and with it, the honking starts. I'm here at my camera person's house in Belgrade, and from his balcony you can hear it all. Car horns, air horns, pots and pans being banged. This is something of a protest tradition here in Serbia. For decades, people who have taken to the streets here have made sure to drown out the sound of what they say is unvarnished state propaganda, disinformation, smears, veiled threats. In these latest protests that have engulfed Serbia, the 7:30 p.m. wall of sound remains a protest staple. For 5 months now, a cross-section of Serbians, led by university students, have been protesting virtually every day. What sparked the movement was the collapse in November last year of a newly restored section of train station roofing in Serbia's second-largest city, Novi Sad. The incident became an emblem of corruption and dysfunction that many Serbians say is the hallmark of successive governments led by President Alexander Vucic. The demonstrations have been nationwide, and in mid-March, Serbia saw one of the largest protests ever. More than 300,000 people, what the government said was just over 100,000, descended on the capital, Belgrade.
Citizens in Serbia have a long and rich history of protests, but this one is truly unique. These are the largest protests since the current ruling party came to power. In that sense, they are unprecedented. This is a decentralized movement led by young people, and public support is greater than ever.
Another significant point I should mention is that these marches have taken place across Serbia. There's also been a feeling of catharsis when people have welcomed the protesters with food from their own kitchens. These scenes will remain etched in our collective memories. I'm literally getting goosebumps here.
Just for you to know, it's not the first time we are facing protests this big. The only difference is that this time they used universities and schools to attract youngsters. So the only new thing here is that you have all these kids. And if you ask a kid, do you want to go to the protest, do you want to go to school? What do you think is going to be the answer? You go to the street, you do the walk stop, and ask them, what are your requests? What do you want? They don't even know.
Suzana Vasiljevic is part of President Alexander Vucic's inner circle. She has worked with him for more than a decade, advising him on media policy and strategy. Corruption is a big issue that is being discussed.
No, it's just a sexy word. Mina, it's just a sexy word. I'll tell you one thing.
Vasiljevic's argument that the majority of the protesters are puppeteered by opposition politicians has been echoed across Serbia's pro-government media outlets.
Imamo situaciju u kojoj dece ne ide u školu zbog terora manjine, roditelja pre svega opozicionih.
In the battle to shape the narrative around these protests, President Vucic has the upper hand.
Of course, the role of pro-government media is the same now as it's been for more than 10 years. Basically, for as long as Serbian media has been under Aleksandar Vucic's paw, these outlets are openly hostile towards people who protest.
Oni su se debelo naoružali, videli ste deo oružja, od sikera, lopata, ne znam šta sve tu nije bilo. Slušaj, imali su
For the host and guests to say that police seized weapons from the supposedly violent protesters is the kind of accusation that's no surprise in Serbia. Of course, it's not true. If it was, then the police and prosecution, both institutions that have been captured by Aleksandar Vucic, would have been the first to come out with detailed statements saying, here we found this, here we arrested this person was detained, and so on.
During these protests, citizens have gathered in front of RTS, the public broadcaster. They've declared war on RTS, protesting the way it reports. They have done similar things against Informer and TV Pink, both key media tools for the government.
Most assessments of Serbian media report a landscape heavily skewed in President Alexander Vucic's favor.
The government itself strongly disagrees with that.
So if you count by numbers, pro-opposition outlets, pro-opposition media, social network portals are bigger.
That denial runs counter to the actual facts of the Serbian media landscape, and observers would say it defies what someone of Vucic's particular political background would ever allow.
Aleksandar Vučić has been a key player in Serbian politics for more than 3 decades. He also has what you might call a special understanding of the media.
Vucic's first role in government was in the late 90s as Minister of Information during the final years in office of President Slobodan Milosevic, the infamous leader who took Serbia through the Yugoslav wars. Since then, Vučić has leveraged his knowledge of how Serbian media operates, and in the 12 years that he has led the country, first as Prime Minister and for 8 years now as President, he has transformed the media landscape. State-owned enterprises such as Telecom Serbia, for instance, have acquired numerous private media companies. Telecom Serbia alone owns nearly 20. Government advertising has been choked off from adversarial outlets like N1 and Nova, which both the President and the Speaker of Parliament called enemies of the state just last month. Nuisance lawsuits keep journalists that the government finds inconvenient busy in court. On the flip side, the legions of outlets that are pro-government, like TV Pink, B92 and Happy TV, work under very different conditions. The president comes on air regularly for good-natured interviews. State advertising money boosts revenue for these pro-government outlets, and the national media regulator looks favorably upon their broadcast license applications. Just last year, a regional broadcasting license was granted to a tabloid newspaper called Informer. The channel has become a viral phenomenon in Serbia, bringing a kind of sensationalism to the airwaves that's in a league of its own.
Taj dekan pravnog fakulteta koga pominje rektor Đokić je jedan
pravi mutivođa.
Boljeg političara Srbija nije imala. Živeo Aleksandar Vučić!
It's hard for me to find polite words to describe the kind of outlet Informer is. The channel produces a vision of a world in which the president is under threat because everyone wants to eliminate him.
Pa dobro, ja mislim da ovo nije prvi put. Kako se ja sećam, bilo je I ranije poziva na likvidaciju predsjednika.
The protests are depicted as acts of hypocrisy by people who just want power and are plotting to weaken Serbia.
I'd like to ask you a question about Dragan Vučićević and the outlet that he runs, Informer. A lot of people we spoke to say that Vučićević plays quite a toxic role in the media. Would you agree? And does it worry you that President Vučić has sat down so many times with Informer and he's even praised the work that they do?
Well, he didn't praise the outlet. He never spoke about the work of any media.
Moja majka je sad drži po ceo dan uključen Informer.
When we are speaking about toxicity, it's more toxic to watch N1 and Nova TV than Informer. Because N1 and Nova, every single day, pushing people for the civic war, pushing the kids on television to speak against their government.
Svaka vlast. Every government certainly wants to have the media on their side. The question is how far they're willing to go to ensure this happens. Some governments that we had before were no doubt suffocating and censoring the media. However, the government we have now has taken things much further.
Do ekstremnih primjera. Sve to ide.
There are negative campaigns happening all the time against independent media or frankly anyone who has anything critical to say about the politics of Aleksandar Vučić. So there's this constant demonization.
I demonizacija.
And finally, this week, we learned Israeli forces killed 15 Palestinian paramedics and rescue workers in Rafah in what looks like a mass execution, then buried them as well as their ambulance to cover their tracks. As Israel intensified its bombing across the Gaza Strip, Palestinians once more collected their babies from the rubble, some with heads and limbs blown off, their parents screaming at the world for allowing this to keep happening. According to a new study by Brown University in the U.S., Israel has now killed more journalists since October 7th than the U.S. Civil War, World Wars I and II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the wars in Yugoslavia in the 90s and 2000s, and the post-9/11 war in Afghanistan combined. We are now 18 months into a genocide that Israeli leaders once denied, but which they barely disguise anymore. It is the worst, most dangerous conflict reporters have ever covered anywhere. They're getting annihilated. And Israel's apologists in the Western news media, the ones who call themselves journalists, are amongst those with blood on their hands.